Alright, so hypercritical gamers are gonna hate this video, and that's fine. My problem with hypercritical gamers is that they're usually getting their opinions from a hypercritical gaming channel. And almost every hypercritical gaming channel has the same opinion. It's something I like to call the hive mind, and so I end up getting a lot of rhetoric in my comment sections that just simply doesn't apply to me. You could consider me a hypercritical gamer, but somebody also with a lot of emphasis on having their own opinions and letting preference outweigh silly, arbitrary gaming standards. I think your preference with a video game means way more than the silly, arbitrary standards you see here on YouTube from, again, hypercritical gaming channels. You know, the ones that tell you the intrinsic problem with box art over the last couple of years, or the ones that like to tell you that Halo was the best game, Modern Warfare 2 was the best game, and here's all the other reasons the games today are out to get you. Shit, I was supposed to say Halo 3, and I just said Halo. So anyway, to cut to the chase here, we're going to be talking about Destiny 2's enemies. That's right, Destiny 2's meat of the meat of the game, the meat of Destiny 2. The enemies, the bad guys that the game wants you to shoot over and over again. You are going to kill a million dregs, a million vandals, a million cabal, a million gazillion hive and taken. And don't get me started on the fucking Vex. You're gonna kill these things so much it's not even gonna be fun after a long play session anymore. Because Destiny 2 is a loot and shoot game. Now I know a lot of you guys probably are thinking, well, when Destiny 1 was gonna come out, we didn't think of it as a loot and shoot, we saw it as a adventurous space RPG. Well, sorry, that ship has sailed. I am tired about hearing the false marketing, the false advertising that Destiny 1 had. I'm tired of hearing about it, because it's over. That's years ago. Destiny 2 is already out, and Destiny 2 advertised itself as complete the story, shoot aliens, there's a shit ton of loot. Regardless of what you think about how Destiny 1 was handled with its DLC content and its advertising, and trust me, I have some pretty harsh opinions about it, we have to realize that that's old and done. It's kind of like Titanfall 2's launch date. At a certain point, that becomes irrelevant. People aren't playing it because people aren't playing it. That's the end of it. Call of Duty could have not come out for another couple of months after Titanfall 2 and people still would have gone to Call of Duty anyway. So if you're still upset about Destiny 1's false advertising, I would recommend you let it go. Destiny 2 markets itself appropriately, letting players know exactly what they're getting into and giving players exactly what they wanted. Destiny 1 was actually very popular with the type of gameplay that it had. People wanting to grind for better loot, and then use that better loot to grind even more, and then use that better loot that they grinded for to do harder things over and over again till it gives them better loot, and that's the type of game it is. See, in order to be critical with your game review, you have to look at Destiny how it is, what it is. You have to look at it like Destiny. You have to compare it to itself first before talking about other games. Destiny is a loot and shoot title. You kill enemies, they can drop items, and those items help you get other items. That's how it is. So it's kind of funny to me when I hear people talking about how easy Destiny 2's enemies are and how it's made for dumbed down children. It might seem like I have a vendetta against BD Dobbins, but the example he uses to show that Destiny 2's enemies are too simplistic is a part in the Black Forest. If you don't know, the Black Forest is where you get your subclasses, and it spawns a shit ton of enemies so that you can decimate them with your unlimited super, because there's these little pockets of light where you charge up your abilities. It's almost impossible to die there. There's a couple times I think I biffed it while playing because I'm shit. But the enemies are just there to walk at you so that you can punch the ground as a Titan or fucking use your bow and arrow as a hunter or whatever.
And you'll notice the enemies in Destiny 2 will never demand that much of you in terms of positioning or navigation. You know, their tactics rarely advance past walk towards you slowly while shooting. If you look at these clips, I never have to outmaneuver or outflank these enemies. I pop out of cover, I pop behind cover. Sometimes if I get overwhelmed, I run backwards. And they'll increase the stats on these guys, but their tactics don't change. You never have to be especially aware of your surroundings. You never have to orient yourself or worry about navigation.
They are there as target practice. It's a fuck yeah moment when you get your subclass, and that's why there's all those enemies there. So those enemies are meant to be docile, and yet Dobbins even used them as an example as to why the enemies are stupid. Just going into the open world of Destiny 2 and just exploring things like Titan or Io, you can walk around and certain enemies, yes, they just stand there like target practice, and when you kill them, it spawns in more of them, and that's the game. I'm gonna get into that more in a second, but even some of the enemies, they will run from you, they will seek cover, they will scurry away, they will flee, and some of the high value targets, though are stupid, can do immense damage to you, and if you are stupid when fighting them, you will get taken out. Not to mention some of the public events or heroic public events can become very overwhelming, and that's something that Destiny 2 does very well, and that's its difficulty gap. You can go from slaughtering aliens all game with taking barely any damage, and then you join a public event, or you go do a patrol to go hunt down a main bad guy, and then suddenly it's overwhelming to an extent, especially if you're playing solo. Now, this isn't to say that Destiny 2 is the pinnacle of skill and the enemies are difficult to defeat, because in fact they are not difficult to defeat. Even in the raid and in the Nightfall strikes, the enemies are not that smart when compared to other first-person shooters. But a big comparison that people do with Destiny is Halo, because they're both done by Bungie. And this is what really gets me. You cannot compare Destiny to Halo, especially Halo's storyline. Halo's campaign is very linear, point A to point B, completing objectives, usually going from area to area, killing lots and lots of Covenant or Flood. These engagements are meticulously set up. That's why when you pop elite shields, they run for cover. If you kill the elite, all the grunts will run around screaming. The jackals are specifically placed in particular areas for that level. Destiny 2 does not need to do this. Oh, but yet it does. In its story, Destiny 2 does place enemies in very specific areas to make your life harder, or at least to give you a cool looking fight scene. But at Destiny's core, even in its story, so keep in mind, even in its story, it is a loot and shoot. This is why the bosses, though are much better in Destiny 2, I think the bosses are more interesting to fight, and like the boss fight areas are more interesting to fight in compared to the first game. They're still very, very simple. But really, if you look at most boss fights in most video games, it's just a larger enemy with a shit ton of health. That's not a Destiny thing, that's just a most game thing. But people talk about Destiny's boss fights as if it needs to be just as epic as taking down a Scarab in Halo 2 or 3. This would completely break the game. Destiny 2 is not a linear, 100% linear story experience where every enemy is, again, meticulously placed for the purpose of balancing the level. Again, it is a loot and shoot. A lot of enemies just soak up a shit ton of damage. And it isn't until these types of enemies are in a large number does it become difficult. Destiny 2 is a grinding game, and if you put enemies like hunters or scarabs into it, yes, it might be more fun, and it would be more interesting than fighting another fallen walker. But the enemies are just easy enough so that the game isn't a chore, and just difficult enough in high numbers that certain events, strikes, and the raid are difficult. Not to mention that certain strikes and the raid and lots of things can have multipliers on them. That changes the light level required to play, meaning the enemies are going to be dealing more damage and taking more damage. Or like in the first game, where certain strikes would make the enemies more aggressive, so they would not stop shooting, they would run at you relentlessly and overwhelm you very, very quickly, and on a Nightfall, that was hell. And even though Destiny might be very, very simple in terms of its enemy design, unfortunately, to a lot of people, that is the intrinsic design of Destiny. You cannot put in difficult, complicated enemies throughout Destiny without just making it a chore. That being said, the bosses I do think could be a little bit more complex and interesting, but when you take those strikes into the Nightfall, the weekly strike where everything's very, very hard, you and your fire team just needs to find a way to take minimal damage while dealing maximum damage as fast as possible. And as much fun as Halo's enemies are to fight, and they are a lot of fun to fight, it would turn Destiny into a chore. So in case I've been rambling too much or just reiterating the same thing, let me really break this down for you. I know there are standards, hive mind level standards that a lot of people have for their video games, and if a game does not come up to that, it's not a good game in their opinion. It's a failure. And I'm not here praising Destiny, and I'm not here telling you that Destiny is a perfect game. What I am saying though, is as much as I love linear story games like Halo 3 or Wolfenstein or Doom, that again have meticulously placed enemies of varying difficulty to balance the level and make it more fun to replay later, that won't work for the design that Destiny 2 or 3 or 4 will have. I think it's important to put Destiny's weird past behind it and just focus on what it is today and what it will be probably for the rest of eternity. A loot and shoot. Loot and shoots don't focus that much on story. They don't focus that much on masterpiece level game design. Destiny 2 isn't a masterpiece. But what Destiny 2 is, in my personal opinion, a fun game to grind that has interesting difficulty gaps throughout its different events and modes. And although I would love to see a version of Destiny that's a little bit harder, a little bit more hardcore, a little less focused on grinding, and a little more focused on just being a really complex, well-designed masterpiece, it is a grinding game, and you have to look at it as such. Comparing games like Halo 3 or Halo Reach to Destiny 2 is like comparing Wolfenstein: A New Order to Call of Duty's multiplayer. Games have their roles and their styles, so it's hard to compare games like Halo and Destiny, Arma and Battlefield, Call of Duty and Wolfenstein. Every game has their own experiences. Some are easy, some are simple, some are complex, some are masterpieces. Some of them are emotional RPGs like Final Fantasy, and some of them are games that just kind of feel like action movies like Call of Duty campaigns. Weighing every game with the same criteria makes no goddamn sense. Some games require minimal effort while other games do not. If you can't wrap your head around that fact, then you have no right to call yourself a critical gamer or a game reviewer. Because when you get to that point, you have taken your preferences so seriously that everything else is wrong because you don't like it. And a really good example of this to close out the video is Wolfenstein: A New Order. Wolfenstein: A New Order is two completely different games, because if you play it on easy, you will have a completely different experience than somebody that plays it on the hardest difficulty. And not every game needs to be on the hardest difficulty. You're not the only person that plays video games. Some people like it easier, some people like it harder, and some people like different games to do different things. Hope you guys learned something, hope you guys got something out of this. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this kind of rambly content. And yeah, I will see you when I see you guys. Goodbye!